Indeed. Okay. Is this better?
Yes.
Yep. Can you all hear me online? Raise your hand. Okay. I think this is the new greetings on a Zoom. Can you hear me? I don't have to say that to all of you live. Maybe I should. Can you hear me? So good morning and welcome to our Sunday May Day celebration here. I'm glad that instead of dancing around a pole, you are, well, you might do that later on. I don't know if you find it worth it or not, but at any rate, on this morning, this lovely May Day morning here in Maine, you are joining us online and in person for these teachings on the way to Bodhisattva. So let us begin by reciting the Vajra lineage prayer. And I'd like you to please remember to have faith and devotion in the root and the lineage gurus as we recite this prayer. And the reason for this is that, as Rinpoche has often explained, as you probably often heard, but which is always worth remembering, we have to remember where we got the teachings from. Of course, the teachings of the Shakyamuni Buddha, but we didn't have it, you know, if we were around 2,500 years ago when the Buddha was around, it didn't stick well enough for us to get out, you know? And so right now in this lifetime, we don't have the opportunity to see the Buddha Shakyamuni face to face. We don't have the opportunity to hear him actually teach the Dharma. So for that reason, but this doesn't mean that we can't practice the Dharma. It means instead that we get the Dharma from our teachers, our gurus. So in this way, they're incredibly kind to us, in some ways even kinder than the Buddhas, because their kindness for us is kindness that we can access, a kindness that we can receive directly from them. And so by beginning by supplicating the root gurus, Trungpa Rinpoche, and then all the lineage gurus, all the masters back to the Vajra, the Dharmakaya Vajradhara, we are able to remember their kindness. And if we remember their kindness and appreciate them, then we can receive their blessings. Receiving their blessings doesn't mean that there's some sort of a magic force that comes from them that then changes us somehow. Instead, it means that the power of our own faith and devotion opens us up to the point where we're actually able to understand what they have to say and therefore have an effect on our being. Like actually the Tibetan word jinlap, sometimes they use it in ways that in English we'd say it's like really moving. So something that can change your mind, change the way you think, change the way you say something. That's what we mean by blessings. So if we recite this prayer with great faith and devotion, realizing it has great blessings, the great power to change the mind, because it's a supplication to all of the great masters of the Karma Kamsam lineage, and also a really succinct distillation of our main instructions, then it has the power if we follow these instructions. And so please keep this in mind as we recite these words of this prayer. Sadam Chaya Yame Shātsavadā Chūjī Shāvādā Jēsūyirāṃ Gujīṃ Suvāyī Gyēvā Chūnzē Dāgī Jīsāpā Amje Dāgī Chāñchū Chīmō Sangye Shindu Mitte Pulayi Yoga Nyanda Shingla Sanje Namgi Sambada Loyi Chera Jirawa Shechun Tuman Kepayi Sheki Kolo Ordo. Glorious, precious Root Guru, please sit above my crown on the lotus moon seat. Care for me with great kindness and grant the siddhis of body, speech, and mind. The Dharma expanse palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas, and 3 times he shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Gurus. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arises wisdom. And now think to yourselves that we need to bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings throughout space, who have at some point in one of our infinite previous lifetimes, any one of them, each and every one of them has at least once been our kind parent and taken care of us with great kindness, as kindly as we've taken care of our own children in this lifetime, or as our parents tried to care for us. And if they did it once, because we had an infinite number of lifetimes, then for any of the infinite sentient beings, they must have done it many times, more times than we can count. And so we should think of them with kindness, and they have treated us with kindness at many times in the past. And so remembering this, we should feel gratitude towards them, feeling gratitude that we should. How do you repay that gratitude? Well, it's by helping them in return. To remember that any help that we give them on a worldly level is only temporary. So we need to try to bring them to lasting help. And the lasting help is what in Buddhism we call enlightenment, and in particular the enlightenment of Buddha. And so in order to bring them there, we ourselves also need to progress on the path to Buddhahood. So first think to yourself that we are listening to and contemplating the Dharma today in order to do exactly this, in order to bring ourselves and all sentient beings to the state of Buddhahood. And listen with this motivation of bodhicitta this morning. The Dharma that we are listening to today is the way of the Bodhisattva by the great being Shantideva. And of the 10 chapters of the Way of the Bodhisattva, we are discussing the 8th chapter on meditation. So after that, a brief 1-verse introduction there, the sections on basically gaining the solitude of body and mind, and then there's the section on meditating on relative bodhicitta on a large level. So we're discussing the first of these still. This is what we're going to be discussing this weekend. Next week, we'll focus on the meditations on relative bodhicitta, but today we're focusing on the gaining the solitude of body and mind. So in order to, and so of the solitude of body and mind, there are 2 parts, the solitude of body and the solitude of mind. And yesterday we talked about the solitude of body. So that means that today we speak about the solitude of mind. Isn't that interesting? You finish one, you move on to the next. And so the solitude of body, essentially what we mean by the solitude of body is that you extract yourself from society and go to some place where you can meditate without distraction, right? You think in order to get yourself to do that, you have to have the motivation to do it, right? If you don't have the motivation to do it, you're not going to do it. And so that means you have to look at, well, what keeps us from doing it? Well, it's our responsibilities, work, job, friends, family, especially family, children, pets, our attachments to things, our attachments to comforts, our attachment to having having a nice warm apartment with a roof over our head and protection from the main winters. Those are our attachments. They prevent us from going off to places where we can actually remove ourselves from the day-to-day things that prevent us from, the day-to-day busyness that prevents us from developing stability of mind. And so we can go to some place where we have stability of mind. So that's the subject of the solitude of the body, physically leaving. So thinking about the reasons why you don't, remembering the problems, what comes from what are all the difficulties that we have, what are the attachments, and what good do these attachments actually do us in the end? Remembering all this and then remembering that, taking the opportunity to actually go someplace else, do something different, to focus on the Dharma instead of focusing on worldly things. That's the solitude of the body. But even once you have done that and you get to your retreat place, if you have not got, like, you find some beautiful retreat cabin someplace in the middle of the Maine woods, somewhere in the middle of the nowhere. You've got this beautiful retreat cabin, you go there. If you haven't actually tamed your mind, if you still have attachments, subtler attachments, it's going to come up in your meditation. It's going to distract you in meditation. So really, one level, if you take a look at it, we're talking about the solitude of the body is kind of like the grosser, the outer level, and then the inner level of attachment that comes up. Because I think many of you have gone on meditation retreats and done a week or two here or there, maybe even a month or a few months someplace. And when you do a retreat like this, you find that you have all sorts of thoughts that come up, and many of your thoughts are about attachments, relationships you've had in the past, relationships you wish you had in your past, what might have been, what could have been, what you sometimes about the future. For me, it tends to be more thinking about the past, but attachments to things, attachments to people, attachments to ideas. Things are my ideas about people in particular, right? So that's what we have to deal with in the section on the solitude of the mind. Because even if you go, you can sit there. This is something that Khenpo David always says. So I have to credit him where credit is due. You can sit there looking like a perfect Buddha, but it's your mind that's important. It's your mind. If your mind is not tamed, no matter how good your physical posture, no matter how isolated your retreat cabin, no matter how isolated the cave that you are staying in, living off of turnips like Karat Rumchum, or maybe there's a nice nettle patch outside and you think you're going to live off that for years. If your mind is not tamed, if you're still attached to things, then it's not going to do much good. Even if you're not going to go to as extreme as living off the nettle patch in years, if you decide, well, I'm going to go to Crestone, I'm going to go to Karma Ling, I'm going to go to some nice retreat center, and there's a cabin I can stay in, they'll bring me food, even if you're there. If your mind is not there, then you're not actually going to be practicing. So we have to have a deeper level of revulsion for the things of this world. We're really going to do it, because now revulsion itself, if you think about it, it's actually aversion. in its nature, but it's useful aversion. It's like, as Shantideva says at another point, I'm going to give up all the afflictions except for the afflictions that overcome the afflictions. So you have to have a little bit of revulsion for the things of samsara if you are going to actually, going to be able to detach yourself. Then once you do, like Milarepa, out of revulsion for samsara, he goes off in the mountains, lives off nettles for 20 years or something. I don't know how long. It's not clear in the biographies, or I haven't taken the time to add up all the years, but it was, well over 10 years that he was living off of nettles. And after that, he could go anywhere. If they gave him food, it was fine. If they didn't give him food, it was fine. Like when, so after he'd left the cave where he'd lived off the nettles and he was traveling around, he started gaining a few students. And one of them was like 15, 16-year-old kid, 16-year-old according to Tibetans, so 15 by Tibet, by a Western counting. So 15-year-old kid comes to him and starts studying. And wants to learn meditation, and the kid is orphaned, so so he asks his uncle, "Can I just study with him?" His uncle says, "Sure, yeah, you can study with this guru. Oh, that's all you want to do, and is just go over there. You're not my own kid, you're my nephew, so you can go." If it was his own son, I don't know if he would have been so easily let go. Anyway, so the uncle let him go, and he stayed with Milarepa. And he got to the point where he was also able to live with, wearing just a simple cotton robe. Basically, in other words, basically being like, almost naked all the time, like Milarepa. It was kind of like, the little Milarepa. You had the big one and the little one, so he was called Rechungpa. Milarepa, Milarepa means a person who wears a cotton cloak. Rechungpa is the little guy, the little cotton-clad yogi. It doesn't sound as good in English. It's a Rechungpa. Rechungpa got sick. And some Indian yogis came by. 5 Indian yogis came by, and they saw him and said, "Oh, you've got leprosy." Now, we're not exactly certain if it is leprosy, but it's some sort of related disease to leprosy. And they said, "You're going to die. This is just bad. You're going to become a leper. This is going to be bad. So you have to go with us to India to get our guru has the cure for this. So you have to come with us to get the cure." So Rajendra says, "Okay, let me ask Milarepa." Milarepa says, "Sure, you can go down to India. You can get this and get cured from your leprosy. But before you go, I want to do a bit of retreat. So just wall up the door of this cave." Okay, so wall it up. Now Milarepa had a little bit of food, a little, stuff in there. Rajendra had this food and stuff, a little package of food, and walled up the door of the cave. This is what they did. If you want to do a serious retreat, you go in the cave and then you wall the door so you can't even go out. And sometimes they would have like a small place for people to pass food in and out, but not for Milarepa. So Rajendra goes off to India, and he meets this Lama who teaches him the meditation practice that overcomes his leprosy, and he's cured. He thinks, "Okay, I'm cured," and he learns a little bit of the English, the Indian languages and so forth. And so then he goes back to Tibet, and it's been like a year since he walled Milarepa in that cave. So he's thinking, "I wonder where he is now. He must have left that retreat and gone someplace else." So everywhere who's asking, has anyone seen Milarepa? Milarepa? Oh, you mean that yogi? Oh, we haven't seen him for a long time. It's been ages since he's been around here. Nah, it's been ages since he's been here. Everywhere he'd go, no, I haven't seen him. Not a word. So Rajendra is like the more he goes by, like when he's thinking about Milarepa, it's like, I thought I'd find him someplace. These are all the villages he used to always go to, and no one's even seen him. Where can he be? Gosh, he must be back at that same cave I left him in. He goes back up there, and there's that wall on the cave that Rajendra had built himself. No one had touched it. And he was thinking, that cave is still sealed shut, and it's been a year, and Milarepa's inside. He had a little bit of food, but he couldn't have lasted. What? He must have died. And he got really upset. And he said, oh no, if he's died, I have to do something. I have to take care of this body. I take care of the corpse and properly dispose of it and all that. He started tearing down the wall. And here's this voice that says, what are you so upset about? Stop crying. Here I am, I'm fine. He hadn't even touched his food. There are 4 types of nourishment. Nourishment by food, nourishment by samadhi, nourishment by karma, nourishment by intention. No, I'm getting it wrong. There's nourishment by karma. I'm combining 2 different lists in my head. So at any rate, you can live off of samadhi if you have a good enough level of samadhi, the food of samadhi. When we talk about this in some prayers, if you ever see that, is actually that you were able to sustain your body through the power of your meditation. Milarepa was able to do that. So Milarepa, so he went a year sitting in the cave, probably not moving, not eating, not drinking, doing nothing, and he was fine. And he goes down to the villages and he has food and he's fine. It's all the same for him because he has a high level of realization. But we're not there yet. We're not on the level of Milarepa. I mean, we come by and we walk down the streets of Portland and you see the gelato places, you see the donut place, you see the coffee shops. So those are the ones that are especially dangerous. And you see the all the various restaurants and all the various food options you have. And then there are the bakeries that you can get some goodies just for, and it's just like so much. So we're not there because we're still attached to it. We still think about it. And I'm making fun of it because I still have the same attachments. I walk down, here's the gelato place. Maybe I should go there. Do they open before lunch? Can I find one? And of course, it would be the worst thing for my stomach, so I shouldn't do it anyways, but it's still that craving's there. Are they open at 11 in the morning? Can I sneak out and get one? So we have these attachments, and that because we have these attachments, we're not able to overcome this. So the first step is to get that solitude of body. And then once you have the solitude of body, then you can go on further to the solitude of mind. So that's the second step, the more intense meditations. This all comes out of a feeling of revulsion for samsara. As it says in the Vajra lineage prayer, revulsion is the foot of meditation. So in the translation you have in your book, it says, what is it? Detachment is the foot of meditation. Which is a translation that we use sometimes. And this is how Trungpa Rinpoche explains. It's like, it's not that you have to, it's like you should just be detached, that you not feel it. Well, before you get to that level of being detached, you actually have to be really aware of its faults. And the Khenpo Karmapa explains it a little bit differently. He says it means like shenlo in Tibetan. The word also means like nauseated. It's like when you feel nauseated by the things of samsara, which is aversion, but it's the useful type of aversion. This is the foot of meditation, or the legs of meditation, because it's what makes you go. When we say foot in English, it's kind of like where you're standing on the basis for meditation. But the explanations are all, it's because of you have, in Tibetan are all you have, because you have these legs of revulsion, you're able to progress along the path. So it's like the legs of meditation. And so it's like someone who has to this meditator who has no clinging to food or to wealth or honor or gain, or like, bless me to have no attachment to honor or gain. So honor being praise and so forth, gain being physical, food and so forth. So this is what it says in the Vajra lineage prayer. So that's a very condensed 4-line version of what we're getting in greater detail here in the way of the Bodhisattva. So we just finished the discussion of the, hang on a second. Before I do that, I have to get everything ready. I've been too busy thinking about things now. Those of you who are watching online get a little bit of a special show. Those of you who are just listening in person, you don't get that. You don't get to see my beautiful slide presentation unless you're looking over the shoulder at someone's computer. Solitude of mind, so it's letting go of thoughts or giving up thoughts. So as it says here, at the beginning, we have a couple of verses that are like the summary of this. In particular, the first one, relinquishing all other thoughts and with one pointed mental focus. I'll strive to settle my mind down in equipoise and to subdue it. So relinquishing all other thoughts, and other thoughts here means any thoughts other than the Dharma you're meditating on. So this means thinking, I mean, of course it means not thinking about any other practice than yours. You know, if you're doing Vajrasattva practice, you should focus on Vajrasattva practice and don't think about Guru Yoga and Mandala and Vajravarti or whatever. But in particular, what we mean by other thoughts here is we mean worldly thoughts, thoughts about things you want to do in this lifetime. So when you talk about worldly thoughts, what we mean by worldly here are thoughts that are focused on the desires and the perceived needs of this lifetime. These are worldly thoughts, and they often come into what we were speaking about yesterday, the 8 worldly concerns: gain, loss, fame, notoriety or lack of fame, obscurity, pleasure and pain, and praise and criticism. So those 4 sets of 2. You want the one, you don't want the other. Most of our thoughts in the world are about this. We want the pleasure of being with someone we love. We don't want the pain of separation. We want the pleasure of the gelato at 11:30 in the morning. It's not really pleasurable. And the times I've, given into this craving, it's not even been pleasurable. So why am I even still craving it? You want some sort of pleasure that doesn't end up being pleasurable, or you don't want the pain of lacking or being uncomfortable, cold, homeless, whatever. And these are the worldly thoughts, and what they do is they distract us from what's most important, which is the Dharma. And so with one pointed mental focus, I'll strive to settle my mind down in equipoise and to subdue it. So by giving up these worldly thoughts, the thoughts of things that we need, that we want to do or think of and so forth, then that they distract us. So by giving them up, then we're able to settle our minds down in focus on our actual practice. In this case, the way the Bodhisattva, it's the meditation on relative bodhicitta in this chapter and ultimate bodhicitta in the next chapter. Or whatever other meditation we are doing. So you have to give up the worldly thoughts. Now, one thing that I wanted to bring up at this point is something that Gyalon Karmapa has said many times over the year, but he said especially clearly in the spring teachings that he that just finished like a couple of weeks ago, less than a couple of weeks, anyways, a little while. And there was, as he said it very clearly, you can either be a dharmic person, a dharma practitioner, or you can be a worldly person. You can't be both. You have to choose which you're going to be. You can look like you're a dharmic practitioner and be a worldly person at heart. You can look like a worldly person and be a dharma practitioner at heart. So what's important is not the external things of what you're doing. And in a sense here, when we're talking about the solitude of body and mind, I know as I'm sitting looking at you that among most of you, I mean, there might be some of you who are inspired by these teachings and by your other Buddhist practice to give it all up and go off and really devote yourself to meditation practice. And if there are, I am going to support you 100%. But I also realize that some of you who might not be ready for that. The question is, how do we get ready for that? Well, the way you get ready for that is by trying in your daily life, in whatever you're doing, to bring your mind to the Dharma so that your thoughts are never separated from the Dharma, the true Dharma, as opposed to worldly Dharma. So not the 8 worldly Dharmas, but the true Dharma, the Dharma that is going to bring benefit in the future. So how do we make our daily lives something that we can actually have a dharmic focus in our daily life? This is something that the Gyalon Karmapa spoke about. And I'm not going to try to paraphrase what he said, even though I translated it. I'm not going to try to paraphrase it now. But you have to have that intention in your mind, that focus of, well, how can what I'm doing how can I become motivated by bodhicitta in everything that I do? How can I come to see the futility of this world in everything I do, in everything I do? How can this become an expression? How can I, and how do I come to understand the, really truly internalize, not just understand, but how do I come to internalize the knowledge of the impermanence and futility of everything about this lifetime while I'm still doing it? So this is about your mind, thinking about your mind. I know a lot of mental work, so that you try to make an effort so that even in your daily lifetime, as you are doing things, you are still trying to remind yourself constantly of precious human birth, death and impermanence, the defects of samsara. These come up all the time in our daily life, and we think of them as just problems that we have, but they're just defects of samsara. Any problem you're having in your life, any loss you have, any type of sickness, illness, this is not you, this is samsara. It's not your fault, it's samsara. You want to escape it, sorry, you're in samsara. You can only escape it by escaping samsara. And that's going to take, it might be a long-term project. So you have to work on it now in this lifetime to try to get it out, get it internalized. So you have this, so instead of walking by the coffee shop and thinking, about how you'd like a cappuccino with oat milk or oat milk latte. These are the big things, I think, these days. Oat milk lattes, people are raving about them. At least some people I know. So instead of thinking about this, oh, I'd like one too, it's thinking about how it's impermanent, how people are deceived by their cravings, how they just run after what they want, hoping to find some sort of pleasure, but any pleasure they do find is illusory, impermanent, and in the end is going to be a cause of further suffering the more you're attached to it. So developing compassion for other people, revulsion for yourself, revulsion on your, not revulsion for yourself, revulsion on your own part for the things of the world, but compassion for the people who don't understand them. So the more you can develop this in your everyday life, then your life is going to become a dharmic life. And eventually, as your life becomes a dharmic life, then you're going to get to the point where you feel like there's nothing else I can do. It's just not worth doing anything else in this lifetime. And then you'll be able to make the time to go off. So this is the contemplations that we discussed yesterday. Thinking about the things that Shantideva said about how difficult it is to get along with other people, how hard life is, and thinking about those. And as you keep those in mind and see how that goes in your daily lifetime, because you're going to see plenty of examples of it. And even the pleasurable experiences, which we do have some that are temporary pleasures, if we can actually come to see that those are suffering by nature, then we're getting somewhere. And then we'll be able to go off and find the solitude of body that we need. And then that'll help us then find the solitude of mind, letting go of all the discursive thoughts. We often talk about how we have when we're giving meditation instructions and talking about meditation, we also often speak about how it's really hard to give up thinking, and thoughts are hard. And in fact, it's often said that you shouldn't try to give up thoughts. And that's actually a very good, because thoughts themselves are not the problem. It's our fascination with them that's the problem. Our fascination with what we think we're thinking about. Our fascination with the projections that we have in our mind. And the more we can see through those projections, then actually, the less thoughts we're going to have naturally. Because what are the things you think about? They're the things that you are attached to, or they're the things that you are upset about and you get upset about things because you're attached to things. So the more you decrease your attachment, then naturally, the fewer thoughts you're going to have in your meditation. So we all have this idea that we can practice meditation in the midst of a daily life without ever trying to see the problems of the daily life, but thinking that there's going to be some sort of a method to make life better. And as long as we're trying it as a method to make life better, it may have some temporary benefit, but won't have as profound benefit as it could have. So we give up this life. Karmapa said many times. Many other masters have said every time, give up this life. As we say in the Guru Yoga practice, bless me to give up on this life. Giving up on this life doesn't necessarily mean that you have to leave what you're doing, leave your families, leave everything, but it means you have to start by really understanding the true nature of what they are, or a truer nature of what they are. Because when you understand that, then you're naturally going to develop that solitude of body, or that wish to go to some place and think. And when you read some of my favorite verses are coming up, we'll probably, hopefully, if I don't blather on too long now, we'll get to them this afternoon. At any rate, but that's the point. And that's why we're talking about solitude of body and solitude of mind. You have to start, though, by working on essentially the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. And the more you internalize those, the better your practice is going to be. And so if you look at the first half of this chapter as ways to understand the defects of samsara in particular, then it's going to be a very beneficial way. If you look at it as some sort of crazy meditation that Buddhists do, why would they bother doing that? I want to enjoy life. Then this chapter is not going to be able to get through. So you have to understand it in this way. Anyways, so oh, wait a minute. I gave you the same. How did I give you the same verse twice? I didn't put verse 39 on the slide. I am terribly sorry. Stop share. Oh dear. Well, I guess verse 39 I'm going to have to read aloud because I'm not going to fix the slide in the middle of this. Verse 39 reads, in this world and the next one too, desires will lead you to your ruin. Here they bring killing, bonds, and wounds, and in the next, the hells and such. So the more, when we're talking about desires, desires are kind of twofold, or they have different types of, desires. There are 2 meanings. There's the actual desire, the mental factor of wanting something, and there also is the things that you're desiring. So here, when we say the desires, these are the things you desire. The coffee or gelato, to use my meaningless examples, but it can also mean a lover, a child, a pet, things, gold, wealth, power, desires. Desires will lead you to your ruin. So often because of desires, if you have a desire and a desire for someone else's partner, and you have an affair, and then it all blows up, that causes ruin and problem. If you have a desire for someone who is supposed to be a partner, who's not anyone else's partner, and you get involved and it goes bad and leads you to pain and divorce and everything else. And even if not, then it eventually ends in death. And so it all leads to pain and suffering eventually. So desires, and if you're too attached to wealth, I mean, look at what happens. If we can think of many wealthy people who are just completely unhappy, I'm sure. You look at the news and you read about several of them every day, names that keep coming up, and I don't need to say that. So they bring these problems in this lifetime. And even if you act on your desires, you can sometimes, if you transgress a law, then in the old days you get killed, or killing, bonds, and wounds. Bonds would mean being like thrown in prison, bondage, or being captured by gangsters, or being injured, or and so forth. And in the next, they bring hells and so forth, because out of your lust for desirable things, you act in ways that then are inherently misdeeds, and those misdeeds, as we discussed yesterday, then rise up 1,000-fold suffering in the future. So these are the different problems of the desires. And one of the main ones that we have, though, is the main difficulties that we have is especially our sexual desire. This is, basically we're in the desire And when you're in the desire realm, there are two main things that we have desire for in the desire realm: food and sex. And it says it very clearly in the Abhidharma. There are two things you have desire. That when you talk about the desire realm and say about what are the desires for: food and sex. And so I usually talk about food, so I don't have to talk about sex. I'm a monk. But we're at the point where, unfortunately, the text is talking about desire for sex, and I have no choice but to say it. And what the next passage is, it's a passage about the repulsiveness meditation. So before I get into that, the words of the passage are not that difficult to understand on their own, but it's a very, very different mindset than we have in the modern world. I mean, it was a very different mindset in the ancient world too. It's just a totally different mindset to look at things that you see that are normally thought as being pleasurable, and seeing them as actually being painful by their nature. Things that we see as clean that are actually by their nature unclean. But these days we have an additional problem, and that is because most of these discussions of this were written by monks who were heterosexual, or who were writing as if they were heterosexual. They were writing about women as the object of their desire, because their primary audience was men. And so when we read this in the current attitude, a lot of people have difficulty about this. And so we have to talk about this issue before we can even talk about it, because if we don't understand it, we just look at it on that surface level, it does sound extremely sexist. So is it sexist or not? The point here, when we're talking about the repulsiveness meditation, is that we're looking at the nature of bodies. And Bodhisattva, who was writing in the time of Mikya Dorje, which was the latter half of the 15th century, he outlived Mikya Dorje by a few years, so it might have been in the early part of the 16th century. What he says in his commentary at the beginning of this passage, it says, for the object of desire, such as a woman. So such as, it can include men. It can include other genders, whatever gender, human. So when we're talking about this, yes, the surface level is talking about women as the object of desire, because the author or the narrator is a male speaking towards his own desires. But the deeper level, if you look at it, this is a male who's speaking towards his own desires, who's fully aware that every criticism he makes of the object of the body that he desires also apply to his own body. Just as his own body is a sack of flesh filled with filth, bile, phlegm, blood, pus, and gore, so is the body of the object of his desire. And that does not change depending upon the gender of the person who's desired, or of the person who's desired. When you have a feeling of sexual attraction from one person to another person, regardless of whatever combination of genders, both of the people are sacks of flesh that are filled with disgusting stuff. That's just the way it is. This is the nature of our bodies. I don't care whose body you do this to. If you flay the skin off the body, it's disgusting. Everyone's going to say. If someone were to give you a plate of the bile and phlegm, blood and feces and urine that were taken from a flayed body and say, is this clean? You would say, no, this is disgusting, and you go puke. Unless you're a surgeon and are used to it. Right? So it doesn't matter what the gender is. That is not the issue here. The issue is instead the attraction. Now, when we're doing this meditation, the effect of this meditation is that instead of perceiving the unclean as clean, you're seeing the nature of the body as it is, a festering machine of filth, as Shantideva says in an earlier chapter. And so you're seeing the nature of it, that nature of it on a deeper level, not the ultimate nature, but on a deeper level, recognizing the nature of your own body and the nature of others' body in order to decrease your attraction, in order to decrease your sexual attraction. Because one of the biggest problems for people who want to help other beings is that our own attractions prevent us from seeing other people in a way that's really going to be beneficial. There is so for someone who wants to be a bodhisattva, wants to be a bodhisattva who is able to benefit other sentient beings, you have to overcome your attachments to certain types of beings and aversions for others, no matter how unconscious there are. And this is a problem that the Tibetan masters and other masters were aware of. This is why you have to do this meditation. Only once you have overcome that attachment can you actually be beneficial. So for example, for me, as a heterosexual male, monk, yes, but I haven't completely overcome my desire. I've hardly overcome my desires. And for me, as a result, there's a difficulty I have when dealing with women. And there's a danger for me, and therefore for the other person. This is a danger that I do not want to give into, right? It would be bad for me. It would be bad for everyone else. It would just be horrible. I don't want to do that. So I need to apply an antidote. How am I going to do that? Now, if I have to, say, I can only say good things or only think good things about that, then I'm not ever going to see the false. So if you look at the things that you think are clean and desirable and see that they're actually not clean and not desirable, then you develop the aversion that helps you overcome, gives you the space that allows you to overcome it. So by doing these meditations on revulsion, then you come to a point where you're actually going to be able to treat people without this problem of sexual attraction. And you're going to be able to treat them more fairly. Karak Gongchung said this in his 70 exhortations. Basically, what he said is, be careful that you don't get fooled by the compassion, by your attachments masquerading as compassion. When you see someone, if they're cute, it's easier to feel compassion. If they're not so cute, it's not so easy. And when they're cute, then you might give them a little extra attention, not even intentionally or not even consciously. And that doesn't help the other person. It doesn't help the person who's not cute, right? So we have to overcome it. So these meditations that we're talking about, that we're going through next, are kind of challenging and on a surface level in the current day, but you have to be aware of what we're going on. It does not matter what gender either the narrator is or the object of desire is. You can substitute. Same meditations, they work. Okay, so that's the thing that I wanted to say, because it gets to be a little bit difficult for people to understand. But I think another thing we have to understand is that there are 4 basic errors that we make. And I wanted to just point these out. So those of you who are online get to see them written out. The rest of you get to just listen. Actually, if you just listen, you might understand them better because you have to remember. So there are 4 errors. So the 4 errors are, the first one is thinking that the unclean is clean. In other words, thinking that sexually attractive people, those beautiful Instagram bodies, are clean. Thinking that what is not a self is a self. Thinking that suffering is pleasure. So what is actually suffering? Oat milk lattes and cappuccino and gelato. They're all Italian. Thinking that suffering is pleasure. They're all actually suffering. And thinking that the impermanent is permanent. These are 4 erroneous ways of thinking that we have to overcome in our practice. This is why we teach in the truth of suffering that everything is causal, selfless, impermanent, suffering, and empty. At any rate, so these are the 4 errors, and it's important to understand them. So the meditation, when you have this excessive desire that you have to deal with, well, the meditation you have to deal with, the way to deal with it in terms of our meditation is by thinking, instead of what we think of as clean, we have to see that it's not. In other words, when you have that Instagram influencer wearing the beautiful thing, I don't care what gender, I'm just going to say the influencer, doesn't matter, because there are plenty of guys and there are plenty of girls and there are plenty of whatevers doing whatever and trying to make themselves look good on Instagram, right? So you want to look like that, or you feel desire for that influencer, or whoever it is you feel desire for. Instead of seeing that person as being someone beautiful who you really want to be with, you have to see them as actually, look at that body that looks good on the outside, especially with Photoshop help, and realize what the nature of that body is. What is it inside? And so that's where we meditate on, why we meditate on the repulsiveness. And so then this continues here in the text in verse 40. Oops, sorry, went too far. The one for whom you earlier made many requests through go-betweens, for whose sake you did not refrain from misdeeds or even from disgrace, for whom you put yourself in peril and also used up all your wealth, one whose tight embrace would bring the highest pleasure is nothing but a skeleton, not anything else. What you have lusted for and clung to has no control, is not a self. Why don't you go to nirvana instead? So part of this is talking about the ancient Indian practices of courtship, which were often done by an intermediary, a matchmaker, a go-between. So, you would have to, your parents would have to communicate through someone with the parents of the person that you were interested in, set things up. Or if you're trying to communicate with someone, you couldn't say something to him or her directly. You couldn't speak to the influencer directly. You had to send a message via someone else to get it to them. And you would do anything to kind of be with that person. You just so want to be with that influencer that you're going to do anything. You'll even use TikTok to do it, to get in touch with that. I don't know, whatever you're going to do. And you're willing to do anything, even disgrace yourself, so as to get their attention. And you use up all your wealth and you put yourself in danger. And you're doing this for the pleasure of an embrace. But when you look at it, what is this person actually? It's a skeleton. The skeleton. In the middle, you've got a skeleton. Then you've got kind of layers of flesh and blood, and on the outside skin. And you can do lots with the skin, and you can also do lots with Photoshop, so you look good, nice on Instagram and TikTok. But this body doesn't have any control. For example, the example that Bodhisattva Triangle gives in the commentary is like, if you have, this is such a 16th century example, if you have a conjurer who takes a skeleton and makes it into the beautiful image of an Instagram influencer. Okay, they didn't have influencers back in the 16th century, but I'm just going to say influencer. And then you get your chance to be with and embrace that influencer. And then at that moment, the illusion ended and you ended up clasping a skeleton. You'd be like disgusted. Actually, it's the same, because the bodies of that influencer's body whom you're grasping, it's just a skeleton covered with all this. And that skeleton, it's all just, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, calcium, some other trace material, minerals, proteins, and all these things that are constructed in this way. These are all just inert molecules. It's inhabited by something else, that the body that you're clinging to, that you're thinking about as being so attractive, because that's what you can see. That body has no control. It's just a piece of meat, essentially. It's not a self. But you go through all that effort. If you had put that effort into, put that same amount of effort into meditation practice, you could reach nirvana. Why don't you do that instead? More beneficial. And here we get to the more ancient Indian. You first took pains to lift her face, but then she bashfully looked down. Whether you'd seen it before or not, it had been shrouded by a veil. So in India, Shantideva's times, there were many women culturally wore veils. Good or bad, I'm not going to judge, but it's what it was. So he was speaking about it. In Mathura, they would wear a full veil. In areas of central India, they would wear kind of a lacy veil. But you couldn't really see the face in it. So you want to see it. You would want to see it, and you try to. And when you finally get with your Instagram influencer and lifted the veil and could see the face, well, that was like what you wanted to do. But now imagine that that influencer has died, and that their body has been thrown out in the charnel ground like they did in ancient India. So you're going and do your meditation in the charnel ground, and you're looking, and there is your favorite lover's Instagram influencer's body, male, female, whatever, doesn't matter, as I said before. Now you can see what you were not able to see before. What you were so interested in seeing before, now you can actually see it. And you see what the vultures have revealed. And now, why does it now make you flee? So if you were to actually see the body of your lover or your influencer in a charnel ground, you'd run away from it. But what's the difference? The only difference is that at one point it was connected to a body and moving, and now it's just lying there and it's kind of torn apart. And so the one is revolting and the other is not. What's the difference? You guarded it so closely from the glance of anyone else's eyes. Why don't you who are so possessive protect it while it's being eaten? So before, while your lover was was alive, you were totally jealous and wanted to make sure that no one else got near, and did everything you could to make sure that no one else. And both men and women do this, and I'm sure trans people probably do it too. It doesn't matter. You want to keep other people away. You want to keep that person for yourself. Now, when you see the corpse, what is it like? You run away. You think, well, okay, it's the vultures. It's the vultures, and it's dead now. But actually, it's the same. It's still protein. It's still meat. It's still blood. It's still all that. The only difference is whether there's mind there or not. The mind is gone. So why are you attached to it while it's animated like a zombie, and not when it's not? There's no difference. You see the pile of flesh that vultures and other animals devour. Would you give someone else's food, garlands, perfumes, and jewelry? So, one of the things we often do for the people we love is we give them, gifts of things to wear. So, you might give them jewelry, you might give them flannel shirts. But if you see someone else in a restaurant eating mashed potatoes and steak, are you going to say, here, let me put some jewelry and some flannel shirts on your steak? It's the same. It's the vulture's food in the end. So why are you so that body that you're adorning with the flannel shirts or the nice woolly slippers or whatever you're going to give your lover? We're in Maine, so you give, what do you give? You give woolly slippers because we're in Maine. All right. So are you going to, here, excuse me, Mr. Vulture, wait on a second. I'm going to put some slippers on this corpse before you eat it. Seeing it as a skeleton, you're frightened, though it does not move. Why aren't you scared then when, like a zombie, it's animated by something else? So when you see the corpse in the charnel ground, you've gone to the corpse in the charnel ground, and you're seeing it there. Then you're frightened by it because you're seeing like it's like the skeleton that's just now been stripped of all its flesh. You're scared of it then. But when you see the living person, you see your living Instagram influencer. At the time that you're seeing that living Instagram influencer, you don't even think about it, but it's actually just the same as that skeleton. Now it's just animated by something else. It's like a zombie. So in ancient India, they would have spirits called Vetali, who would come, and they may still be some Vetali, we don't know. They would come and they would inhabit a corpse and then go off with the corpse. So people would carry their loved one off into the graveyard and then leave them there, and then the Vitali would come inhabit it and go away. I also saw this in Tibet until recent times, and I think if no one believes it, no one is actually going to see them anymore. But they would say that there would be people who had died, who would then, the bodies would then be reanimated and walk away. And so the people who saw this sort of thing and believed that this was like a zombie. And so that's what we mean by a zombie here. It's kind of different than a voodoo thing, but I think it's probably similar. You know, if you have voodoo, if a corpse is like, what do we say? Animated by magic and turned into a zombie, and the same thing. And it's scary. You see all those zombies walking at you in the movies, you know, and you get scared, right? Well, it's the same thing, because that corpse, that body that's walking around, that the Instagram influencer who's posing so perfectly, is actually no different than a zombie who is controlled by the afflictions of greed, hatred, delusion, and then the anger, aggression, spite, contentiousness, arrogance, pride, and so forth, and envy, that all come out of that. And so they're moved around and they don't have any control over themselves, just as a zombie has no control over itself. It's animated by something else. So the other people, these beings, they're animated by their own desires, by their own afflictions. They're under someone else's control, the same as a zombie, so that they do all these ridiculous things in Dubai and put their pictures on Instagram and TikTok in hopes that people will like them. And then we look at them and we see them as being beautiful. But it's the same. If you see a corpse, if you see a zombie walking for you, it's actually the same, because it's under the control of something else. You lusted for it when it was covered, so why not when it is uncovered? So when you bring the corpse into the charnel ground, it's too bad we don't have charnel grounds anymore and can't do this meditation in person. I've often thought maybe I should go to there's some scientific places where you can go and do, where they actually study the decomposition of corpses that have been donated to science. And I thought it'd be interesting to see if I could contact one of them and go and do this, but I haven't got the time, or I haven't made the time. But so when it's brought to the charnel ground, then the shroud that it's brought in is torn away, and the scavengers start to eat it. So you lusted for it before when it was covered. Well, I guess if it's an Instagram influencer, it's barely covered, but when you're lusting for it. But people wear alluring clothes, and you feel attracted to them when they're wearing alluring clothes. Then when you see the corpse that is ripped out of its shroud, and you're no longer attracted to it. Why is that? It's the same. If you say it'll serve no purpose, why would you embrace it when it's covered? If you say, well, the one that's the charnel ground doesn't satisfy your needs, it's the same. Why would you embrace it when it's covered? It's the same body. Since both saliva and excrement are made out of the very same food, why of the two do you dislike excrement and yet like saliva? So why do we enjoy kissing people? And we kind of revel in that. I'm not going to speak about this too much, but we don't. If you were to be presented with a plate of their excrement, you'd be totally disgusted by it. So you like the one, but they're actually the same. They come out of the same cause. You drink food, you eat food and drink water and other stuff. And some of it comes out one end as saliva, the other comes at the other end as excrement. It's the same stuff. So one of them you enjoy, and the other you don't. What's the difference? So you might say, well, that your lover's body or the Instagram influencer's body is going to be nice and soft and feel good. Well, cotton is soft and feels good. Not even taking pleasure in the cotton pillow. Egyptian cotton, 600 count, really smooth, soft to the touch. The lustful say it exudes no stench. It doesn't smell. It's those pheromones we need, right? But exudes no stench. They're deluded about filth. But cotton may be soft to touch. Deluded, lowly, lustful people get angry over it and say that it's unable to make love. So, but actually, it's clean compared to the bodies of our lovers or the Instagram influencers. If you have no desire for filth, then why embrace another person, a cage of bones that's bound by sinews and plastered with mud of flesh? So that the body of the person that you see as looking good on the surface, if you look at it underneath, it's just sinews, a cage of bones bound by sinews. You know, it's just, you've got bones and tendons and sinews and ligaments and all sorts of flesh and stuff put on it. It's kind of like a sculpture made out of organic ingredients, but the insides don't look good. So why do you want that? Especially when you yourself are exactly the same. You have a lot of filth yourself. You should be satisfied with that. Thirsting for the unclean, you lust for yet another sack of filth. The sack of filth, it's like your skin is the bag that keeps all of your innards from falling out, right? So that's a sack. And what's inside of it? Intestines. And what is inside the intestines? Poop. A bladder. And what's that filled with? Well, urine. You've got, you know, bile ducts that are filled with bile and phlegm and fat and blood. And inside your bones, you've got marrow. If any of this ever came out, the first thing you do, like if you ever, anytime some fluid comes out of your body, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to clean it up. If it comes out of your nose, you wipe your nose because it's going to be unclean. If you walk around with, you know, a snot stained face and, you know, snot all over your clothes, you know, it's going to look bad, right? So you clean it up. That's out of your nose. Earwax out of your ears, right? Anything that comes out of any of your orifices is just disgusting. We clean it up. You don't want it. You leave it. If you get a wound and it starts to bleed, are you going to like sort of go around and say, "Hey, look at this! Isn't this nice and clean?" You've got this big scab all over you. This, like, you know, this is disgusting. If you have all sorts of pus and goes, what are you going to do? You're going to clean it up, right? So your own body, and that does, you know, not even to mention, you know, what happens when you go to the bathroom. So that's your own body. Your own body is like this. So you have to recognize this is the nature of your own body. The other person's, the one you're attracted to, their body is the same. Oh, I don't know. How far did I want to go today? Right. Yes, I'll go a little bit further this morning and then we'll have some questions. Saying this flesh is what I like, you want to touch and gaze on it, then why don't you desire the flesh that is just void of conscious nature? So if your attraction to someone is a physical attraction, you're attracted to the flesh, right? Not to the mind. But if you're attracted to the flesh, then you're going to be, you should also be attracted to the flesh of the corpse, as this is saying. But if you say that it's the mind that you are interested in, you're not interested in the looks, you're just interested in their mind as a really great person, the consciousness that you desire cannot be touched or looked upon. What can be is not consciousness. Why bother with a pointless embrace? So if you're interested in the other person's mind, then why would you bother worrying about their body? Right? It's the same. The body. If you know, we say we're interested in the other person's mind, but then we feel attraction for the body when we're feeling sexual attraction. Not realizing another's body is filth by nature is no surprise. It's easy not to notice it with other people because their bodies look good. Not realizing that you yourself are filth is most amazing. Filth itself is most amazing. So you don't recognize your own body as being filthy and disgusting. And so if you don't recognize that for your own body, then there's no way you can recognize it for anyone else. I think I'm going to go over what do we say? I think I've gone on enough for today. We will leave it at this point. We'll pick up with verse 57 again in the afternoon. And at this point, I would like to ask if there are any questions. I think there might have been Peter, didn't you have an interesting question? Prompting Peter. Or do you want a moment to remember your question?
Well, yeah, it is hard to remember, but because yesterday, hearing about distancing ourselves from other people and all the reasons for that, I found all that. I mean, I've read Shantideva a number of times, and I've always thought that these were sort of extreme teaching techniques, but somehow yesterday I was really reacting, and it kind of really, like, it was provocative and annoying. And like, this doesn't apply to me, and I'm not a monk, and but actually and I was like really got quite cranked up about it internally, but and I think as I was sitting here today, I think it was more like it was annoying because I realized it was true. Now I realize the truth of it. So I don't feel, I really feel the value of all of this. And then I also thought we've gotten teachings, Shantideva somewhere else says, it's through other beings, through other relationships, through other people that I'll come to Buddhahood. So how does that jive? So I get that was sort of my process. And also, just I gotta say, I really appreciate your discourse this morning about physical revulsion and all of that. That was just amazing. So thank you. So,
I mean, in terms of when we're talking about gaining distance from the world, solitude from the world, solitude of body, and leaving society and going into retreat. This is a big issue because we have a lot of teachings that talk about, well, you know, as Peter mentioned, as Shantideva is saying, it's because of other sentient beings, only because of other sentient beings that we can achieve Buddhahood. So why are we viewing them in this way as being foolish, being children whom we have to leave? We also have many teachings in the Mahamudra tradition, for example. We have teachings on like taking afflictions as the path. Shouldn't we actually try to stay there and work with the situation to actually try to take the affliction as the path? These are teachings that we are exposed to, and they teach, and there are good, valid Buddhist teachings. But you have to, the first point is you have to really look at where you actually are yourself. Are you actually able to help the other sentient beings at this point? If we have to gather the accumulation of merit by helping other sentient beings, are we able to help the other sentient beings? For example, we can help sentient beings material at this point, but helping them in terms of the Dharma is hard because we don't know exactly what people need to hear. And, you know, so for someone like me teaching to all of you, I'm just kind of doing a blind guess. I think probably not blind guess entirely. I kind of got to know you over the years and such, but it's like, I don't really know exactly what each and every one of you needs. So, you know, it's taught in the sutras, and Atisha says the same thing. Until you gain clairvoyance, which comes from meditation, you can actually read other people's minds and know exactly what they need, then it's actually hard to teach. This is true because it's very easy to say something that is going to be hard. So you have to develop that before you're actually going to be able to give people the generosity of Dharma. We need to develop compassion for other people, but if you want to develop compassion for other people, then you actually have to have enough stability of your mind that you're not going to react with anger when they do something that actually should provoke compassion and should provoke understanding. This is what, the whole topic of the chapter on patience is that. You have to develop that quality, and sometimes in order to develop your qualities where you're going to be able to help other sentient beings, you have to first go off in isolation and work on yourself first. Because if you don't, then you could end up being contributing to the problem more than you are solving the problem, helping in the situation. When we think about like with the Mahamudra teachings of taking the afflictions as the path and so forth, these teachings, although they're taught freely, and Rinpoche has taught them on many aspects, and in other places it's said very clearly, that you have to have stable recognition of the nature of your mind to actually be able to do that. So in other words, if you don't have the stable recognition of your mind, if you've had like a few glimpses of the rate of your nature of the mind, yes, when the afflictions arise, it is an opportunity to see the nature of your mind. If you are able to get your attention away from the external appearance and instead focus on the nature of the internal anchor, which is hard. It's hard, it's not easy. If on the other hand, you have meditated and have familiarity with the nature of the mind, then when in the post-meditation, the strong affliction arises, then it's an opportunity to look. But if you don't have that stability first, it's hard. It's not impossible. If you have the blessings of a great guru, it can be done. But for most of us, it's hard. You take the gradual path. The Mahamudra path is always taught in terms of first, developing the looking at the mind in stillness, then looking at the mind in motion, looking at the mind in appearances, and then looking at then you do the post-meditation practices and so forth. And so it's a process that you have to go to before you can actually get to the point where you can really do these practices of taking the afflictions of the path and so forth. Sometimes there are people who manage to do it early on through the blessings of the guru and their own capabilities, but for most of us, we need to develop ourselves. But how are you going to develop yourself? If you're always someplace where you're always being distracted, it's not going to happen. And so this is a difficulty. Okay, I think that Angela has a question.
She
So
does.
I'm going to turn up my sound. Hang on, I'm going to mute myself and then I'm going to turn up my sound. Oh no, that's what's muted.
Can you hear me?
Oh, I can't. I'm sorry, Angela, I can't hear you yet.
Okay.
How do we?
Maybe that you need to turn down the volume on your computer too.
Well, let's turn up the volume a little bit. Okay, Angela, can you try?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Just a little bit.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Are you ready for the question?
I'm ready for the question. I'm leaning so that I can hear it from the speaker on my computer without causing feedback.
All right. First, thank you, Khenpo, for being here. It's wonderful to see you. And I know what a big journey it is to come from Canada here and to stay here for so long. And I think we deeply appreciate it. Now, my question. Samsara is defined very clearly all the time. What is nirvana? What would make me want to stay in a cave and not eat and meditate for years or even a year? What would keep me there?
Mm-hmm.
And also there's some part of desire that brings you there in the first place. You want something to
Right.
do that. And also where is nirvana defined? We talk about samsara all the time in great detail.
Mm-hmm.
And of course I experience a clearer and clearer everyday life that makes a difference in my life, which is why I keep meditating. But I don't know what the highest levels of meditation are all about. I only know what the effect on my everyday life is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to be inspired about nirvana as much as I am inspired to avoid samsara.
Right. Okay, this is a good question. And I'm going to mute my speaker and then repeat it for everyone who is not able to hear it. I see some of the people in the audience here have headphones on.
I just made a note to myself to bring headphones in.
Yeah. Anyways, The question essentially is, well, first of all, Angela, thank you for coming and spending so long at Maine and saying it was a difficult journey to come here from Canada. It's not so difficult, it's very easy. It took less than 12 hours to get from Vancouver to Portland, and I've been fed and taken care of. It's like a vacation in some ways. So I hardly feel like it's a hardship to come. But the real question is, what is nirvana? What does it mean to say nirvana? Why should we want to be inspired by nirvana? Why would we, like when you hear about people like Milarepa meditating in caves with nothing to eat and doing this for the sake of nirvana. So what is the nirvana that's motivating them? Angela mentioned that what keeps her inspired is that she's seeing how things become clearer and clearer in her daily life, and that's what keeps her meditating. So what is it about? What is nirvana? About nirvana is it that should inspire her to practice? So when we talk about nirvana and samsara and nirvana, generally it sounds like nirvana is some other place that you're going to, some other state, some other realm where you're completely free of everything, where there's like no more suffering and all that. It's like kind of like the pure realm, but even more so than even purer than a pure realm. You read the descriptions of like the pure realm Sukhavati, where the Buddha Amitabha, and it sounds like kind of like some sort of heaven. And so we think that nirvana is like some sort of extra special heaven, someplace you have to go. But actually, nirvana is not some other place that we have to go. There's not some other place. And even when you talk about the pure realms of the Buddhas, like Buddha Amitabha, the pure realm of Sukhavati is not some other place, actually. You talk about it like that as a way to inspire people, but it's not. Nirvana is not another place. It's not really any different than samsara. Because samsara and nirvana, nirvana is the actual nature of samsara. So we have samsara is on the level of our daily lives, where we experience the sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, and death, not getting what we want, not being able to keep the things we have, losing the things we love, and just the general stress of daily life and all the other difficulties that we have, the problems that come up in our lives. This is what we talk about as samsara. But when you look at the nature of all of these things, then they all come from grasping at there being like a me and something else that I want or that I don't want. And that creates our suffering of samsara. That comes from the idea that there is a me. That idea of a me is based even more on the misunderstanding that there are some sort of real things that are like the building blocks for me. So nirvana is actually just having a complete understanding of such a complete understanding of the nature of our experience that you're able to exist within or sustain yourself within the realization of the unity of the interdependence of all appearances and the emptiness of the nature, the luminosity of the mind that produces the appearances, and the inability to find that actual mind. So when you're able to stay within that realization, then like Milarepa, who on his physical body and the common appearance is sitting in a cave starving, in his own perception, he is being well fed on the food of samadhi, because he is at that point either close to some nirvana, or he had already achieved Buddhism and was always completely in nirvana. So the nirvana is not some other place, it's not something else. In a sense, when we talk about the improvements in our daily life, these are like the very first steps to breaking down the habits that keep us in samsara, the habits of thinking, the habits of the afflictions, the habits of reaction, and so forth. The basic conceptualization of there being good and bad, desirable, undesirable, big, small, self, and other. And as we break those down further and further, then we begin to see the nature of our experience, not so much as things outside of ourselves that we either want or don't want. Not the nature of experience as there being a me and someone else. Not the nature of experience as being some sort of mind or basis, and then what comes out of it, but instead just being this union of the appearances and wisdom and the empty wisdom. And when you have that level, that's what we would call nirvana. So ultimately, our goal is to get to that state where we can be completely happy no matter where we are. I mean, the recent example, not recent, I mean, that's the example of this I think is so wonderful these days is Mingyur Rinpoche, who went off on 4 years of retreat and has come back. He had near-death experience. He wrote about experience. And wherever he goes, whatever he do, he's perfectly fine. But he's still here. His body is still here for a while, and then it will pass along and he'll come back in another body. But his mind is elsewhere. So ultimately, the nirvana that we're looking for is not somewhere else. It's not something else. It's not that. But in order to inspire ourselves, we think of it as being like a journey. We're taking steps. So every time you feel yourself being a little bit calmer, better able to do things in your life, this is like taking a step on your journey. You're in the same place as you were before. You're still here in Maine, I think. Maybe you're not in Maine. I don't know where you are right now. You could be anywhere. You're still here in this world. You're taking steps. Each step you're taking is taking you closer, but it doesn't move you physically anywhere. As you take more steps, then you get closer and closer, and eventually you arrive at nirvana. Sometimes in order to go nowhere, you have to go somewhere, which means that in order to go to nirvana, which is not somewhere else, then you need to go somewhere else and take retreat or teachings or something like that. And you physically go someplace to do that. But the point is not that you have to eventually completely leave your life. It's that you have to be able to fully understand it. So in order to fully understand your life, you have to sometimes withdraw from it for a period of time. That's why we do retreat. That's what we're talking about here. That's why this is what motivated Milarepa to spend decades in the cave, motivated Karak Gongchum to spend 11 years eating turnips. But both Karak Gongchum and Milarepa and all the other masters, once they had achieved enlightenment, they were fine going anywhere. Milarepa just liked staying in caves. And he saw that it was helpful. And so he stayed in caves and got other people to stay in caves. And they also became enlightened. Not just Rechungpa, but also his sister Peta, his former betrothed Zese, Shiwa and his other great women disciples. I don't want to forget that. There's so many women listening. There are quite a few great women disciples of Milarepa as well. It's not just men, not just Rechungpa and Khenpo, but there's also other disciples you have to remember. You can do it too. We can all do it. But in order to get there, you kind of have to sometimes interrupt your daily life. And that's what we're talking about in terms of the retreat.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? Anyone online or in person? Yes, Dan.
It's a little off topic. Every time we read Shantideva, I think this is the greatest, most indispensable book we could ever study.
Mm-hmm.
And we're always discussing and debating what to study together as a Sangha.
Uh-huh.
I wonder your recommendations for other great texts that that you would call indispensable, that everyone should really study in the interest of attaining nirvana.
The curriculum committee. The Leaves of the Heaven Tree. Good one for Monday, well, maybe for Wednesday nights. It's a set of Jataka tales. So it's important to know the Jataka tales. Maybe these would be something not to go through all at once, but to sometimes when you have a break, you go through and you read the Jataka tales about the things that the Buddha did The Life of Milarepa in the translation by Andy Quintman, published by Penguin Classics. The 100,000 Songs of Milarepa, of course, there's the recent translation by our friend Chris Stagg. A very nice translation. That might be more than you want to do in that, but certainly in that one, like texts like the story of Milarepa and Palderbom is a great one. Classic, absolute classic. They're all classics. So the life stories of the great masters, the Jataka tales, these are ones that are helpful in terms of inspiring faith and so forth. That's very helpful. And with the Jataka tales, when you read them, then you also need to think about, well, what is the lesson that this is teaching? The Buddha didn't just teach these stories because they're nice stories, although they kind of have that quality of like, you know, almost like something you could read about in a Joseph Campbell book, you know. But there's something that's being taught in all of them. The life of the Buddha. All of these are important. So I'm talking mainly about life stories. Now, when it comes to actually in terms of like philosophical things that are teaching you, I think over the years, you've covered quite a few of these different topics. And it's important to, I believe you've read, I mean, talking with you, it sounds like you've gone through the book by Chalak Rinpoche on karma and so forth. Other texts you can think about would be like the Letter to a Friend, the 37 Practices of the Bodhisattva. Of course, these are classics. There's also Rinpoche's book, the advice from a yogi on the verses by Padma Sangye, that's already in English. So these are all good things for you to consider studying. But I think you have to look at I think it's important to mix up the inspiring texts and the teaching texts. So you go a little bit of inspiring, a little bit of teaching. A little bit of inspiring, a little bit of teaching. Maybe at some point in some of your more advanced classes, going through some of the texts like the Ornament of the Middle Way. That's a big one. That's one that Rinpoche always recommends. All right, well, that might be enough for this morning. And we will, what do we say? We'll do the dedication prayers. We'll do the shorter versions right now, just the, let's just do the Sunamdi for now, then we'll do the more extensive dedications in the afternoon. So please, let's dedicate the merit of our teaching and listening to the Dharma, so that it brings all benefit to all sentient beings. So that by this merit, all the great masters who uphold the teachings may have long lives and be able to spread the Dharma in all realms, and in particular, the Gyalon Karmapa and Khenpo David live long and spread the Dharma. We should dedicate this so that we can become able to truly serve them in spreading their teachings, so that all sentient beings may quickly achieve Buddhahood, and until such time as they do, experience no suffering. By this merit may we attain omniscience, defeat the enemy, undoing and free all wanderers from the ocean of churned by great waves of birth, age, sickness, and... Okay, thank you very much.